Hello, and we are live. Thank you for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. Oops, am I? I'm hearing Matthew's audio. Sorry for that. This is DevRelCon, and if this is your first time, or if you've heard of us, hopefully you've heard the information that DevRelCon SF, which was an event that was supposed to happen June 1st and 2nd in San Francisco, obviously won't be happening in person. So I'm Tama Nakahara, and the co-organizer and co-founder of DevRelCon, DevRelCon San Francisco, and we have Matthew Earle here, who started DevRelCon in London, and we've had affiliates in Tokyo and other places. We decided we're going to make it DevRelCon Earth and make it an online event, obviously to keep people safe at home, and also our speakers as well. So we'll be kicking that off at the end of June, June 30th, as a Tuesday, Thursday sort of series of fairly long events where people from around the globe can tune in at time zones that are convenient, or if you have early hours or you're a night owl, you can go to all of it, depending on where you live. And so leading up to that, we thought it'd be great to start these weekly broadcasts as well on Thursdays, just for an hour. It's like an online meetup because we know that there's a lot of DevRel related content that's very relevant right now, as a lot of us who do developer marketing, developer relations, developer experience, community organization stuff, we might have to suddenly shift gears and do stuff online that normally we would have done in person or under different formats. So hopefully, if you've been joining, we were very lucky to start the series with Joe Nash, who's very experienced with Twitch. So he talked with Matthew about tricks and hardware hacks. Last year we had George Castro. Very lucky to have him to share, get really into the weeds of OBS, which if some of you are needing to stream, a lot of us have had to learn that open source software to be able to broadcast on things like Twitch and YouTube Live. And today we're very, very lucky to have Tessa Kriesel, who will be sharing with us probably another thing that a lot of people needed to do, which is spin up an event site, like sometimes maybe that day or overnight. And she's been advocating for a while for WordPress is well known, and WordPress is still one of the potential candidates to use if you do need to have to spin up a website really quick. I am a candidate of that as well. I literally have spent the last couple of days getting a bare bones site to look fairly decent, and thanks to the help of Matthew and other friends. But yeah, WordPress can be, I was joking with her, it can feel like a drug because your first 2 hours you feel like, oh yes. And if you're like me and I did some WordPress ages ago, like my muscle memory is coming back, and then immediately I was like, oh yes, and now there's all these rabbit holes that I can go down and really, really get stuck. So we hope that this will be useful content. We're so lucky to have Tessa with all her expertise to share with us. If you're in this boat, what is the best way to get started, and what are the things to be thinking about?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to know and a lot to learn in this regard. I would say to start off with, when you're thinking about your event website or you're thinking about a community website, the content I want to talk about today is definitely taking the two and really bringing them together. I think that they can be cohesive pieces as a whole. Is really just like, what platform are you using? And today I'm talking about WordPress. There are obviously multiple platforms, but I think WordPress is a really great opportunity just because it's open source and there are so many folks who are building for it, and so many folks who are building for it like for nothing. It's just hey, I'm throwing this plugin out here. I'm throwing this theme out here. Feel free to use it. And I think that opportunity of the open source angle with WordPress is really powerful. So when you're first diving into WordPress, I think there's some technical things that you need to know, and that's what I really want to share starting off. It's easy to just go grab WordPress off the internet and start to use it. I think two things to think about, or kind of two different reasons or variations with WordPress, is there's WordPress.com and there's WordPress.org is kind of what they call it. WordPress.com being solely hosted with the WordPress platform, and you have extreme limitations on what you can do. I'm not saying that it's not something that you want to utilize, but you won't be able to install your own plugins or install your own themes. You'll be forced to use what WordPress.com offers you. So when I say .org, I'm actually referring to the open source project that is out there. It's open to use. I'm sure most of us are all familiar with what that means. And so you download it and you can install it locally on your computer, or you install it on a host and you start to work with it that way. I think that the host is probably the biggest decision that you need to make in terms of your technical stack, because it's not just necessarily hosting. Like, sure, you can go throw that host up on, on DigitalOcean and do whatever you want with it. But the thing about WordPress is that there are all of these different kinds of, I like to call them rumors, but they are partially true if you're not maintaining your website, and that people think that it's not secure, that it's vulnerable, that it's load heavy, and it can definitely have a lot of those drawbacks to it. But I think what's really important about it is making sure that you have it on a solution that helps with those drawbacks. So finding a managed hosting provider that covers some of those things for you, that has security measures in place, that has, performance and caching and CDN and all of that great stuff integrated, so that that your website is performing at its possible best. So I have a blog post I think we're all going to share out. Or if someone wants to throw it in the chat, they're happy to do that too if you want to follow along. But the blog post is really just a summary of the content I'm hoping that we get to talk about today. I have a few hosts in there that I recommend, one of which is a previous employer of mine. So I'm a big fan of them, mainly because I've been involved in their company and I still love them to this day. They're awesome and really great people and a great company and product. And that's called Pantheon. So the great thing about Pantheon is that you're working with different environments. So the second part of it that's really super important is making sure that you are never, ever, by no means, editing your live site. And a lot of WordPress hosting that you might find on the internet will be like, yay, we install it for you and we're managed. But at the end of the day, they're giving you your live site and you don't have a dev environment or a testing environment or a different type of an environment to install things on to just make sure that they're working. If you've ever installed a WordPress plugin before, and I can guarantee there are some of you who are just like laughing about the white screen of death or some other things that they've experienced. Plugins come from a variety of different developers in a variety of different places, and they might be written in all different PHP versions. So you just need to be cautious when you're starting to install things on your site. So having that backup, that dev environment, or working locally, or working in some type of like a test or staging environment is very, very, very important for WordPress. Like I say, anything that you listen to today, listen to that thing. Do not build on your live WordPress site. Outside of that, there are a few other hosts I have in there that I recommend, but I think that's really your first big decision is that hosting provider and the platform that they're offering you.
Okay, so I just wanted to break it down. So you have WordPress.com, which if people don't want a lot of, let's say, control, they can, if they're really desperate, they can do that. I definitely,
Yep.
I created a free account because just to do a journal. It doesn't have to look pretty. It's not really anything, but people could do that if they need. And of course, that means that the infrastructure is always updated, right?
Yeah.
And then you're talking about the hosted options where WordPress is offered as, like, I think back in the day, like Dreamhost, right? They had like one-click installs, and like you click the button and you get WordPress. Or we were talking about WP Engine, right? It just shows right there. And I think even like I have my domain registered at Namecheap, and they had a thing called like Easy WP. I haven't gone that route, but so there's that's that group. And then you're saying are you generally recommending the third, which is that you would download WordPress from WordPress.org and you'd actually use it on a platform of your choice where it's not part of like a easy click install, but that you would be installing it. Is that these three options that you're kind of, I'm hearing that you're tending to recommend the third choice. Am I correct?
Yes, so close. You're very close. So, Dreamhost that you mentioned, where it's the one install, most of these managed hosts do have the one install. And so you click it, you decide to make an account. It's a form, you fill it out basically, and then they spin up your site for you. But what the part I want people to pay attention to, the one-click install is totally fine. But what you want to pay attention to is making sure that host is optimized for WordPress. So I never want to say anything negative about any company, so I'm not going to call anyone out. But just make sure that there's SSL included, that you've got some form of caching or CDN, that there are extra security layers. For example, Pantheon's extra security layer is that their live environment is not writable at all. So if someone tried to like mess with any of your coding with your theme, your plugins, your core WordPress, it's not a writable environment because of the way that their Git infrastructure is set up. So no one can come in and just rip apart a WordPress site, which is what happens the most. It's either tons of like brute force, someone's trying to log in, or someone actually goes in and gets access to your files and just like destroys your site, or sometimes it's just the index file. They just rip apart the index file so that WordPress just doesn't load it in general. So the one-click install is actually amazing, and I promote that because then you don't have to worry about configuring a database and all of those things. But just making sure that your host is offering that one-click install in, as well as those staging environments, performance, all that good stuff that I've mentioned.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so once we've gotten to this place, what are the other guidances that you have, I guess, before we even get into the WordPress part, right?
Absolutely. So I think from a technical standpoint, like domains and all of those things, they're very similar to that. So, anything that you look for on the internet, there's lots of stuff on WordPress online. So I don't want to focus on some of those intricacies you can find somewhere else, but try to share some of the knowledge that I have from building WordPress sites for a long time. I'd say the next step for me would be to go into WordPress settings and to start to think about some of those settings. So just a few things I like to pay attention to is like time zone. So when I've got some comments or other things that are happening on a site that I know my time zones are aligning well with the time zones I'm in and paying attention to, including like permalinks, like how do you want your URLs to be structured? That's probably one of the first things that I do, because before you create a page, before you create a post, you want to change that permalink so that those URLs correlate to what you want them to be. There's like this thing in WordPress where it like takes all of your images and it puts them in folders based on years and months. And I don't know why, but that feature drives me crazy. So I turn that feature off because I just want all of my images to be in one folder. One of the lacking parts of WordPress is I feel like media organization could be stepped up a bit, but it is what it is. Just go through those settings, make sure everything is exactly how you want it to be, make sure people can register for the site if that's an option that you want. Going through each of those different settings in your general settings to make sure everything is set up. That's probably the next step. I would say there are also a few other things to think about. So there are things like forcing SSL URLs within your WordPress infrastructure. So I like to use a plugin called Really Simple SSL. That one's free, pretty easy to use. Also thinking about like search engine optimization. That's another kind of what I call like a rumor about WordPress, is that it's not optimized for search engines. And I think that's wildly inaccurate. It's just you need to have the tools that will make your site optimized for that. So bringing in like a Yoast SEO is a really great plugin. So there are probably a few core plugins that you might want to bring in just to make sure your site is optimized in terms of the optimization and performance, depending on what host you landed on. Like, is there caching involved? If there's not, do you need a third-party plugin to bring into play there? So I'd say that's kind of the next step, is just like overall configuration and any kind of like default mandatory website things that you might want as a part of that.
So to back up a little bit, it's like some of these settings that you're talking about, like for example, the media. So those are settings that are within WordPress admin, or are you talking about settings that you'd be doing on your hosted site? I wasn't clear with that.
My apologies. Definitely should have clarified. That would be within your WordPress admin. So your hosting provider, wherever you land on, is probably going to have a variety of different settings as well. And I think those are really important to pay attention to, but it's hard for me to speak to that until I know what host you're actually landing with. But yeah, definitely making sure that you're checking on any of your host settings as well, because you might have to turn on SSL, or you might have to add your domain name to be able to point that. You might have to do a variety of other things to just, enable debugging or enable some of those other features that you need. I know there's one host in particular that needs you to turn on the actual caching, and that it's not something that is available. So that some plugins who do caching, they want that to be turned on. So there are a few different things with your host that you'll want to pay attention to just make sure those are turned on. But I'm definitely referring to like the WordPress admin. So after you kind of get all of this, you're going to get your URL to your WordPress admin site, front end of your site and the admin side of your site. And you'll want to obviously dive into that admin side and start configuring those settings.
Yeah. And to also back up a little bit, just assume maybe there's some people who suddenly they have to put up a site. They've never done this before. They've maybe just figured out, okay, I can register a domain name. It looks like it was available. I went and got it, etc. And, there's the whole aspect of either, redirecting and pointing to your site, or actually going into your settings and making sure that when people visit, it does show your whatever.com. Do you want to go into that just in case people feel like, because these are things, I was just like, oh yes, like, a C name and all this stuff. I was like remembering like these old memories, like, okay, that's right, this is how this works. But I hadn't been in there in a long time. So I remembered, but I think, there could be a lot of people who've just never done it before. They're like, okay, I figured out that I could get this domain name, but how do I have it have a relationship with where I hosted my WordPress site, right? Are there good tips that you have for people who are suddenly having to do that as well?
Yeah, I would say, I think in terms of like that type of content, that's definitely all over the internet for sure, and you should be able to find something. Happy to always help you, but I think that just thinking about like what that host might need. So your host is going to ask you a subset of questions when you start to create your site. They're going to ask you your domain name and some of that other information, because they're going to want to configure your platform for exactly what your needs are. And so when you add in that domain name, you will obviously have to go back to your domain registrar and enter the details that your hosting provider provides you. So essentially, that domain needs to be connected to your hosting needs to be connected to your domain, and you're going to have to pass information between the two. And the hosting providers are usually very good about providing exactly what you have to do and where those need to go. Sometimes they're A records, sometimes they're C names, sometimes they're a variety of different records, just depending on exactly what you're doing or how you're building out your platform for sure. Try to think if I have any tips there. Just if you've never launched a website before, there's definitely some things that you'll probably want to brush up on or do some research on in terms of propagation and connecting domains to hosting. If you end up on a hosting provider that doesn't offer SSL or doesn't offer caching or a CDN, you might want to look at something like Fastly or Cloudflare. So you've got that SSL level, or Let's Encrypt to bring in that. Because you want to make sure that you always have that SSL as well as that level of caching or CDN to just increase the performance on your site.
Yeah, and I'll add my personal feedback that whatever service you're using, don't be shy about jumping into the chat box and getting help. Like I know that you had some opinions about WP Engine. I just went on it because Matthew was like, "Oh, I've used it; it was fine," and I have not been shy. I've been in that chat box, and they have been very, very helpful. So I'll say that that's a plus. And
Yeah.
For a basic site, it's fairly affordable, and I was just like, I need help, and they've been really helpful to get me through and get it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great thing. So the one thing about WordPress is I cannot reiterate this enough. I spent years in that community for a reason, and I've been building websites with WordPress for, I don't know, probably like, let's see, what year is it? Like, I would say almost at 10 years at this point. Maybe even more actually. But the great thing about WordPress is the community and the people behind it are incredible. For the most part, you're just going to experience everyone kind and lovely and amazing and helpful. And it is so refreshing if you haven't been in an environment like that. So welcome to the most amazing and inclusive community ever. But I think that definitely take advantage of that. Like I have clients that I build websites for. It's something I kind of do on the side a little bit. I try to focus more in the DevRel space, but I had a client who was just like, hey, I can't figure out this thing. And it ended up being something that actually was a host setting that they just didn't have configured. And then eventually we just needed to flush the cache. And so I just kept reiterating to her that I was like, if it's not about functionality or if it's not directly about your site, if you're feeling like something isn't right, like something's not being cached, you're seeing old content or something isn't doing what it's expected to do, unless it's directly tied to a plugin or a theme that you're installing, it's likely something on a high level. And even if it isn't a hosting responsibility, many of these WordPress hosts, especially the ones I mentioned in my blog post, will bend over backwards to fix anything for you. So that's absolutely credible. And I am not at all surprised that that's how you were treated, because it's just a great community to be a part of.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so maybe we can get into the WordPress part and to just, like I said, there could be some audiences here who've never had to even look in a WordPress admin dashboard before. So like we've been kind of throwing around these words, but I'll say explicitly. So like a theme, we would describe as a type of template, right? And if you've gone to like WordPress.com and tried to create a personal blog, you'll see kind of this marketplace where there's free and paid themes, and you click on it and kind of just suddenly makes your site look like something, right? And then you can figure out what you want to do from there. And then plugins are add-ons that give certain functionality, and it just I would say the range is almost endless, right? It could be everything from, like you said, SEO to a core functionality to something that you want the site to do, to look a certain way. Like you can find plugins for a lot of that. So let's start there. You clearly know a lot about like some plugins that you recommend, and also just the general knowledge that some plugins are maintained by people who are serious about it, and some people who are serious, but then life happened and they're not maintaining it anymore, and then you have a new WordPress version, and things can break. So like, what are the risks that we should know about in advance?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is such a like loaded area to talk about, but I think in general, just to kind of reiterate what you said, themes are really, when you think about it, is like taking a theme and saying like, this is how I want my website to look, but there is some slight functionality in it. So there are some themes that are strictly just about the appearance, and those are my favorite because they're usually very performant. They're minimal amounts of code. They are very hyper focused on the appearance of your website, which is what really a theme can do. But I think there is an opportunity with your theme to expand that. So depending on your technical abilities, or depending on if you have developers in your side pocket, you could end up building out some very robust functionality inside of a theme. I feel like for this use case we're referring to, we might have a lot more people who are just trying to grab a theme and install it and run with it because we're trying to spin up sites quickly for this change in our life. So themes can be very powerful as well. So you can actually end up getting a theme. Like if you try to go find a theme on ThemeForest, just be very cautious about some of those themes, because then they can be loaded with tons of stuff you don't need. There are some page builders that are really heavy hitting to your performance, and they can be kind of problematic. So this is one of those cases where like keep it as simple as possible, the KISS statement, trying to find that simple theme that has that appearance that you want. In my case, the platform that I ended up building is actually for a online conference that's called FlyLessConf. So the URL is flyless.dev. So if anyone's listening to the stream, you actually can experience live, if you join the site, exactly the plugins and infrastructure that I'm going to kind of walk through. But keeping in mind that theme is really about that core appearance, and you're going to grab plugins. And like you said, you're definitely going to get plugins that are supported, they might even be commercial. I actually have no problems paying for plugins because I know that I'm getting the support that I need, and I know that they're being maintained. There's kind of like this controversy in the open source PHP space about whether people should charge for those types of things. Drupal, I think there are a lot of folks that build for Drupal and they don't necessarily charge for some of those things. So there's just some dynamics in that, and just wanting to reiterate that it's another one of those things that like you get what you pay for. So when you're buying a plugin or some infrastructure or functionality that you need, just keeping that in mind. One thing to think about with plugins is checking the WordPress repository. I don't know what the website is. It's like wordpress.org, and it's probably just /plugins, to be honest with you, but it's the repository. You can see that repository from within your WordPress admin dashboard, but you can also see it if you just navigate to it through just a web browser. And there are a couple things to pay attention to there. The one thing is like the last time it was updated. Has it been updated within the last few months at the very least? Has it been updated since the biggest version of WordPress has been rolled out? I would say our biggest release was probably, when was WordCamp US? Was this not last year? I want to say it's going on a year probably that the blocks were released. Man, time flies. Anyways, there was a release when 5 came out, and that integrated what is called Gutenberg blocks, which makes the content editing experience absolutely incredible. Once you start to dive in, you'll see that you've got these blocks, and everything is very block driven, which allows you to be able to build out pages with lots of different content and lots of different integrations very easily. Nonetheless, make sure that you're checking for the last time that has been compared to at least a version 5. If they have never tested for version 5, I would strongly recommend not using that plugin, because 5 was a huge change to WordPress as a whole. So last updated, the number of people using it, and this is kind of a given, like the more people that are using it, the more people that are reporting errors, the more people that are trying to find resolution. Also, the more people that might be contributing back to that plugin because it's open source, and might just have more contributors who are keeping it up to date. And then there is a little area that says tested with, and whatever version it's been tested with. If you don't see that, that might be a flag for something to be concerned about. Or if you see that it hasn't been tested with anything in version 5, like I just said, would be something that you'd want to pay attention to. In terms of themes, one thing I want to share really quick, there's tons of stuff on the internet about themes and plugins and like WordPress best practices. And I very strongly encourage you to try to do some research on that, because we could talk about that for hours just in that tiny little topic. But that themes have different subset of files essentially. And so when you're working with a theme, there are a few files that you might want to pay attention to. The functions file, for example, is a lot about adding functionality to your theme. So if you're not getting something that feels normal to WordPress, or something that maybe documentation is saying, hey, go to the admin bar or go to this other thing, check inside of your functions file in your theme. And if you don't know PHP, that might be kind of hard to read through, but that might be a good place to go to, because functions inside of a theme really controls what it can and can't do, and there might be some limitations built into that theme. Other things to pay attention to would be some of your page templates. So page.php is going to control anytime you make a page. Single.php is going to control anytime you've got a post. We've got archive, which can take a variety of paths. I think just doing maybe some good Google research on like templating. And if you have to get into that place where you're finding some problems or something's not functioning as you expect, start to look at like the template hierarchy, and you'll start to see like what files come in at what places and at what point. So if you've got some custom files, those will come in first, versus if you're just working with the normal page files. So just a few tidbits of information on themes as you're kind of starting to dive into those if you've got some unexpected behavior. I feel like that was a lot. So
yeah, I was curious in terms of unexpectedly high traffic. Honest, but unexpectedly high traffic. Is there anything that you can do on the WordPress level, particular plugins or some settings with your hosting provider to be thinking about?
Yeah, definitely. I think high traffic, that is something that will come back to your server and infrastructure at the very first level. Because if your site, let's say that you build the site right, and maybe this isn't your forte, maybe you're not a developer by trade, maybe you don't understand all of the pieces that go into building a site, and you're just trying to do what you can with the amount of time you have. I think that host will be your good fallback. So there are things you can do to optimize your WordPress site. Some of it might be with themes, and come back to just some of those core web development best practices. Just all the things that the Google Lighthouse tests try to recommend. So Google Lighthouse, if you're unfamiliar with that, is really, it's kind of like an overall site health check. You can actually run that through Chrome developer tools. So if you're in Chrome, you can open up those developer tools and run a Lighthouse test. It's actually called a site audit inside of those tabs. I strongly recommend doing one of those, because it'll come back and tell you a few things that you can fix. It might be something with, maybe you're not compressing images, maybe you're not minifying your CSS. There's just a variety of things that you can very quickly do or very easily do that will help with that. So run that Google Lighthouse test, try to optimize your site as much as possible. If you do think that your website is going to be high traffic, I strongly recommend that you try to tag someone in who is really knowledgeable on WordPress, whether it be, you try to find a developer, whether it be you try to find, just someone who can help you for the time being to just at least like make sure everything's on the up and up, because that is something that can be of concern, is making sure it is performant and making sure that it is secure. So if you don't necessarily have those technical skills from that WordPress site level, make sure that your host does. Find the best host, or use one of those hosts that I recommended, because they are the best of the best, because they will cover some of that for you. Some of those bullet points in my blog post as like Pantheon and Kinsta and GridPane, I would say those are probably my top 3 recommendations. And they're all recommendations for a variety of reasons. GridPane also has like that managed level that's taking care of some of that performance and some of that optimization for you, but they let you actually host your website on whatever server you want. So if you want Google Cloud, if you want DigitalOcean, you want AWS, if you've got opinions about that, then like GridPane kind of has that nice little like layer on top of whatever platform you want to use, where Pantheon and Kinsta, I think, are actually both on Google Cloud, and they're both containerized. If you don't know much about technical stacks, definitely do some research. Containerized technical stacks can be much more efficient than some of those shared hosting providers, which at no fault, like my only hiccup with WP Engine is that it's not containerized, and they're just reselling shared hosting in my honest opinion. However, they are really great people. So if you're using WP Engine, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. I know enough about the technical side of WordPress that I want to make sure that I'm using what I feel like is the best of the best when it comes to some of that optimization and hosting.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's helpful. All right. So getting into the nuts and bolts of specifically an event site. So you've got to now suddenly run an event. You probably have a registration page. Do you make your own? Do you maybe use Marketo already? So maybe you create a Marketo landing site. Maybe you want to embed some of it there. You'll probably want to post a schedule. I'm not sure if some people might actually run the video stream of their online conference on the actual site. So yeah, some of these sort of event specific thoughts. What recommendations do you have? Like what's the best way to get started with, I guess, registration, sharing speaker info, talk info, schedule, and maybe even broadcasting from the site?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took it from more of like a community level, right? So thinking that anyone who wants to come to an event is a part of some type of a community. I think right now the drawback of virtual events is that although I have seen a couple of really great providers, there isn't a amazing platform to just do these events on, right? There isn't something that is it's got your sponsors, it's got all the things that you possibly want. So you're really missing that like community and that interaction side of that virtual event. And so I am very opinionated on the fact that you should try to replicate that as much as possible. So on the infrastructure of that site, I have many recommendations on things that you can do, but at the core, what I really like is like adding the community angle. So there is a platform, BuddyPress is an open source plugin that is contributed by open source developers. One of them I personally know, and he's an incredible person. And it allows you to have kind of that functionality of community. There is a product and it's called BuddyBoss. And this is in my blog post. If you are wanting to make sure you're taking notes, don't feel like you have to write everything down. I've got a blog post mentioning all these things. Is that BuddyBoss is actually a theme itself, and it's a plugin that takes the power and the functionality of BuddyPress and just like intensifies it and gives you this theme that like showcases all the greatness of BuddyPress. That's probably the best way to explain it. So that's the theme that I would recommend if you really want to focus on that community angle. Outside of that, you could definitely look for themes and try to find whatever works best for you. In terms of themes, I would strongly recommend something like Astra. Astra is really good in terms of just having a very robust site built out, but also really clean and performant and optimized. And it integrates with page builders. So if you are not the type of person that has any technical skills or wants to write CSS or wants to start to write some code to do some of the fancy things you want to do with your schedule, I strongly recommend that you look at like an Astra theme with a page builder combination, or that you try to find a page builder that you love. So a couple page builders, and these two are not in the blog post, so I apologize for that. But Elementor is one that I really, really like. And then Beaver Builder is another one that's really, really great. So if you're trying to think about content and you don't want to have to write code, maybe you want it to look a certain way. These page builders are really great about asking colors and other things when you're adding little pieces in to make it look really, really nice. But BuddyBoss kind of covers that for you. So coming back to that community angle is that BuddyBoss is that theme that's built out. Everything looks great. It's really clean. If you go to flylist.dev right now, you'll see its exact use case without any finesse or any fluff on it. I just left everything kind of plain Jane out of the box. So those are really...
This is BuddyBoss right now? This like in action?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So flylist.dev is BuddyBoss in action. So BuddyBoss, the theme, really just helps make everything look great, right? Like pulls that BuddyPress and the BuddyBoss plugin and just brings everything together to make it appear really awesome. The functionality of kind of that whole combination is like member profiles, registration. That's a huge thing to pull out. The WordPress core user registration, so not necessarily registration to your event, but just having an account on your website can actually be kind of painful from the core state. So BuddyBoss really tries to take a lift on that member registration and makes it feel more like a website registration and less like they're in the admin of a WordPress site. It also has like those member profiles, member searching. You can connect to people, you can private message people. And it also brings in groups like social groups that have integrated members. Basically think of like Facebook group. It's got members and discussions and like all these other features that groups could have. And then it also has like forum discussions all on its own. So I think that if you're trying to kind of do a roll your own event, this is a very helpful platform to have, because you can have all this community stuff going on and you can encourage that community involvement before and after your event. So depending on your use case, you may want that type of a situation, or you may not. And that's really what kind of the BuddyBoss platform can offer you, is that really cohesive community piece of it. So that's kind of the first angle. The next piece, like more kind of coming around events, is that I think there are many different ways you can have your own event, right? Like we're all trying to figure out like how do we stream it? What are the best tools for some of those things? And I don't necessarily have all the answers for that, but I can talk to you more of the technical side of building out your website for that. So there is a plugin, and this one's called the Events Calendar, and it has like I have it in my blog post, but they have kind of like a like fingers together kind of rock star style logo. So there are a couple of different events calendar type of plugins for WordPress, but this one specifically is called the Events Calendar. And they actually threw out a coupon code for DevRel. The coupon code's DevRelCon, so you get 25% off anything you want to purchase on their website until the end of the month. And I will continue to update my blog post. I did actually reach out to all of these providers to ask for either coupon codes or referral codes or anything that would help in terms of getting people an extra little added discount. But this plugin specifically will allow you to have an event list. So the event list might not be super necessary if you're just doing one virtual event, but if you're going to do many virtual events, or if, for example, DevRelCon, you're doing these weekly streaming events, it'd be perfect for that, because then each event would be listed out and it would say, here's the event, here's the details to join. People could register for a ticket. They could specify different ticket variations if you've got different variations, and then you can also check out. So if there's like a monetary angle to that ticket, they could go ahead and check out. What I love about this plugin is that there's more to that. There's this tickets, there's this RSVPs that gets really robust. There's also this community angle that lets you suggest events. So that was what we kind of looked at from the Flylist site, is that we really wanted to make sure that everyone was just getting exposed to whatever they needed, because everything was just so new and different. And just making sure that, you can go ahead and share that. So that community angle lets other people submit events on their behalf. So if you want to have like an event board where it's like, hey, we know that you're hanging out at our event or you're spending time in our community, here are some other places that you might also want to spend time in. And then one thing to add about that is that they are working on an add-on for that plugin to make it more virtual friendly. Right now, you have to kind of use a workaround to just put like Zoom or virtual inside of your venue fields, but they're working on trying to make it more virtual. And so I'm really looking forward to that and being able to implement that when that comes out as well. So that kind of covers some of like the event. But when you're talking about like an actual event, when you're thinking you have speakers and you have a schedule and you've got, registration pages and you've got, I'm just trying to think all the other pieces, sponsors, whatever it is you have going on, most of WordPress core really can handle all of that for you. You may not even need a third-party plugin to do any of that. You may be able to just create that in Pages. With the rollout of Gutenberg blocks, being the block editor, there are more blocks that exist. And you also can go out there and download blocks. So essentially they end up being plugins that you're downloading. But what it is the plugin has a subset of blocks that allow you to create content in a variety of different ways. Depending on how complicated or technical you wanted to get with your site, you can start to dive into different post types, where speakers could be a post type, sponsors could be a post type, your sessions could be a post type, and then you can start to connect those two from like an actual data standpoint, within your database, pulling them together, outputting that content. That would probably require a developer to get to that technical level. But if you're building a website that's for a very large scale conference, it's going to have hundreds of speakers with hundreds of sessions, I strongly recommend that would be the path that you would take, just because the connections and the data will be a lot cleaner and you won't have to do as much manual work. The thing about WordPress is like you can build and automate everything if you wanted to, or you could do everything manual. It's really just your technical skills and where you can take those technical skills and span that out. I'm going to pause for a second because I feel like you might have questions, but there are definitely more plugins on my list to talk about.
Yeah, no, I thought that was helpful because as I have been
in WordPress especially. This is something that WordPress has really needed, a more robust content capabilities, and it's very exciting for anyone who's been in WordPress for a while, for sure.
Yeah. I did have a question, though. You were talking about the plugins to allow sort of the chat functionality within WordPress. So, for example, if you already have a community like on Slack, what do you think is the best way to, and actually we've had these conversations on like you have the chat during a broadcast, but then you want people to keep chatting afterwards. And then I was just at the, I'm really excited that I've asked Austin to invite the team who worked on the great DevOps, the deserted island DevOps in Animal
Oh,
Crossing.
yes.
Just thought it was great. But I did think it was interesting that I wasn't in Animal Crossing, but I'm watching the Twitch stream, and then they're saying, go to our Discord. And, there's always this difficulty of where do you have the actual chat? Like, what's the short term and the long term? Does anybody have the answer to that? I don't know.
I have opinions. I'm not sure that my opinions are the answer. I think that the great thing about WordPress is that if I can, reiterate anything in terms of plugins, is taking your normal platforms and bringing them into WordPress. You can totally make WordPress your normal platforms. If you didn't have any community offerings today, WordPress could be an amazing community offering. And I've actually built multiple occasions for some of my advocacy clients where their entire community is solely in WordPress. And it's amazing because you can customize it and it's open source. So if you want to hire a developer to build this crazy new thing, great, you can do that. But I think that it is likely that most of you are probably going to have pre-existing communities that already are in existence that might already have people in them, or platforms that you're using. So things like Slack, bringing, how can you integrate with Slack? Or maybe you're using HubSpot as a CRM, or Salesforce, or like you mentioned, Marketo. A lot of these bigger companies have WordPress plugins that are already built, and they're almost always free because they're offering them to their customers that have a platform already. I strongly encourage that you integrate those into your site because you will start to collect data on that. So for example, if you're using HubSpot, you'll get all your contacts into HubSpot as they register for your site, or as they register for anything or complete any forms on your site. You'll start to get that data. But on the flip side, you can access some of that HubSpot stuff from within WordPress, which can be very handy if you don't want to have to open up another browser and go into HubSpot. You might be able to see something that you want. There is a plugin and it's called Gravity Forms. There are tons of form plugins, and they're all great. There's Ninja Forms, there's WP Forms, there's Contact Form 7 is free, and it's pretty minimal in terms of features. There are a variety of forms. I personally love Gravity Forms because it has tons of integrations for it. So any tool that you're probably using today probably has an integration somewhere for Gravity Forms. So think about Trello or Asana. Someone submits a form and that form ends up creating a card in Trello for a thing that you have to do, right? So if you have a workflow that you're trying to do behind the scenes, try to automate that in WordPress. So if you're inviting people to Slack as they register for your event, cool. Use Gravity Forms, create your registration form, make that as one of your integrations where they automatically get invited to Slack so that they are already a part of that. Try to take whatever it is that are your normalities and bring them into that space so that you have a more optimized workflow and that you're doing less work for yourself, essentially.
Awesome, that's helpful. I do want to make sure we include the possibility of running the actual stream on your site. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before we got to that in terms of, I feel like we've covered pretty well the registration issues, the conference chat experience, calendaring. I think we're pretty good. Anything else?
Yeah.
I guess because my basic question is it a good idea to do that? Right now we just have a link going out to Twitch, right? But is it possible to embed? Is it a good idea? What are the pros and cons?
Yeah. So I think a lot of this is going to come back to personal opinion. And I think there are multiple people in this world that are going to have opinions about your websites, right? Because when someone comes to your website, there's always this let's not send them somewhere else, because you want them to remain on your website. You want them to keep interacting. You want them to keep engaging. So I'm always an advocate for let's get as much into our website that makes sense, but let's not force it. If it doesn't feel right, or it's not functioning well, or if it is going to deteriorate the experience, then don't do that. I think that WordPress is really great with their embeds, especially with this rollout of the new blocks. There are lots of different embed blocks that will allow you to bring in YouTube or Vimeo, or I'm actually not sure about Twitch. I'd have to research it, but I'm happy to do so and throw it out in the DevRel space on Twitter or something. I think that if you can integrate it and it functions well and it's not taking away from the experience, do it. Because if you have some of those pieces in your site, if you are trying to push for them to interact with your community on your WordPress site, or if you have other content there that you really want them to be absorbing, I think that it's a great contender. I think you also could try to make a makeshift version. So Hopin is actually the provider that I've seen from CMX and their Connect, or whatever their global Connect was that they just did. Incredible, like mind-blowingly amazing software for having a virtual event. But I know it's still in beta, and I don't know who can get access to it. And I'm just, there are a lot of unknowns with that. So I think the thing that you could do with WordPress is that you have this opportunity where you could create multiple pages or multiple different places on your website that you could allow your sponsors to have some space, whether it be they've got a whole page to themselves for content, and maybe they're integrating like a Zoom or like a Google Hangouts like live stream or something. Or let's say that maybe there is like some workshops that you have going on, and like maybe they're streaming from a different place. I would say that it really is going to depend on like what your end product is for streaming and how you're going to go about doing that. But I think just thinking about how can you make the most cohesive experience for everyone and make sure that things are easy to find is probably most important. And definitely try to embed that when you possibly can.
Awesome. Yeah, you mentioned about all these practices about staying on your site, going to another site. So that kind of opens up the whole bigger can of worms of developer marketing and developer marketing versus other types of marketing. And the ways that developer marketing in some ways is very aligned with even some types of consumer marketing where companies are very savvy about building community. That's part of the reason that Matthew and I started this conference, was that I felt like we shouldn't be all over the globe having separate conversations. Like, let's create a community and share notes. But yeah, what are your thoughts on, so, there's always going to be this tension of like, okay, let's just throw them up on Twitch. And then you have certain people be like, where are my leads, right? And then to talk about, well, there's different metrics. Like maybe your leads are maybe your metrics are just straight leads, and you agree upon that, and you structure your site and the experience based on that. Everybody has to sign in, right? Or maybe you're going for numbers or something else, and you want people to be engaged. We've been testing out at where I work at Weaveworks. We've been testing out these broadcasts where people can join either on Zoom or on YouTube Live. Because, people can kind of do whatever. And it's different every time, but sometimes you feel like maybe there's a culture of being more chatty on YouTube Live or on Twitch versus in Zoom. Sometimes Zoom explodes and people are being really chatty depending on the topic. So, yeah, what do you think about are some metrics that you think work if you're going to do an online event? If it is going to be about the leads, what's your recommendation on doing that? And if it's not, what are the ways that, like we're creating, obviously like a follow-up, there's a takeaway, like you get it. If you sign up, then, you get the follow-up email that will give you this kit that we're providing for people who will come away from the conference. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
This is definitely a loaded question, but I have lots of thoughts on it. I would say that as someone who like leads community, and it's really my day-to-day job to think about the strategy of that, like how can we make sure that we are best creating community programs that are scaling, but also that are engaging. I think that a core metric of attending an event is not something I actually would care about. Like the number of people that attend the event is probably not something that I would be like, this is what is going to make or break, or where I feel like this was successful. Only because what I care more about is engagement. I want those people engaging with one another because I want them finding and providing that value, because as soon as you make that connection, even if it's just one conversation where it's like maybe you're in the chat and one person says something to some person and someone says something back, you instantly feel that bond, right? And that's what community is. It's like where you feel like you're with your peers. And so if you're trying to get them to engage, you're trying to create community around it, the number of people who just watch your event is like a moot point. What you would want to look at is more around engagement. So those who are like actually engaging. So is there a way for them to track that? Do you have that community? Are you using BuddyBoss? Are you using any of the community offerings inside of WordPress? Are people talking to each other? Are they engaging? Or are you using a different tool to do that? You might also have different goals. Like your event, if you're building an event for your company, and it's more on like a sales pitch end of things, or if you're doing something to really push an agenda forward, I think that you might have different goals, right? Than if someone cares about that community and that engagement. I'm in that community engagement space where I want to build a place for people to feel safe and welcome and do those things. In terms of integrating some of those metrics with WordPress, that's also coming back to some of those things that you're already using, right? So if you're seeing trying to think of a good example. There are just so many examples that I could use. Like if somebody registers and maybe they attend the event, like how can you track that? Like how can you track the value of what they're getting out of the event? Because I think just tracking numbers doesn't prove like what parts of the event that you did better than other parts. It just proves that people decided to register for the event. So something thinking about like, is there a way to track if someone goes to a specific session versus not another session? Like how are you doing that from a streaming software angle? And what sessions actually are becoming the most popular and what topics are becoming popular. I think everyone kind of has a mission for their event. And I think that mission is going to drive more to where you want, where I'm just talking vaguely about in general metrics of things that you can care about, could care about with your event. One of the things that I didn't talk about, and I know we're kind of getting close to time because we were trying to keep it at like less than an hour and we're almost to an hour, is that there is another plugin. And in my blog post, there are a few other plugins I don't think we'll get to, but definitely read those if it's something that you want in your site. I am a huge component and probably something that I would say is like my specialty in the DevRel or kind of developer marketing space is that I focus on building advocacy programs. I don't want to have a gigantic marketing budget and I'm using all pay-per-click ads because I think that like you all can probably relate and everyone else who does DevRel or who's in this space can relate that developers do not listen to cold. They're not going to look at your ads. They're not going to listen to your cold emails. They're not going to answer your cold phone calls. Like they're going to listen to their friends. They want to talk to their friends. They want to talk to someone they trust or someone in the space that they know that they trust already. And so I'm a huge component for advocacy programs and really getting your community to kind of help grow it itself, right? Like getting more people engaged and having those tools there. So this plugin actually allows you to add a gamification angle to your WordPress site. Again, it's called GamiPress. Yes, it's called GamiPress. But the thing about it is that you can do everything. So if they submit a form, if you're using Gravity Forms and they submit a form, they can get points for it. They can get ranks for that. They can do a variety of different things. And I think that that is where you can make things different. Like take your sponsors and create swag packages that end up in a swag store. So GamiPress can link with this plugin called WooCommerce, which is a widely known e-commerce plugin. And you can use the points that you earn in some of these challenges that you build with GamiPress to buy things in a swag store. And that in itself is incredibly powerful because you're letting other people market your event for you. You can create challenges like refer your friends or, hey, I saw that you registered. You got points for this. If you go create a new group in our community and start to bring people together, you'll get points for that. Or if you share a tweet about content we create, you can get points for that. And everyone knows that there's like this level of competitiveness in all of us, even if we're not competitive people, that's like, oh, yes, points. Like, how can I get better? How can I share this? And even if it's not about that, if they have a passion for your event or a passion for the content that you're delivering, they will want to do those things. And by nature, we all want to be a part of communities and feel welcome. I think that's why we all feel so weird right now, being stuck in our house and not being able to do those things. So there are other things that I think that you can take advantage of. And if you start to bring in some of those types of gamification or engagement methods, then you will have much better metrics to track too. Because I would rather know how many people were brought in based on a referral or how many people brought new people to my event versus like how many total people attended my event. That might not be serving me well, but I will be learning from something if I'm trying to figure out how they got there to begin with.
Awesome. So if we can, I would love to wrap up on, you talked about engagement, and I think that's really important. And we're in a place right now where, a lot of people in developer experience and developer relations may tend to be people who are pretty social and likable in different ways, right? And so that's why we have community managers and developer advocates who go out there and meetups and make friends and help people break the ice with each other and all that. And it's very different now that you have to do it either by video or you don't even have video, right? And it's a common challenge where people who we know who are great people and very likable, sometimes in chat, they don't realize how their tone might come across. Like they say something and it seems really snarky and they had no idea. And so not to make it too broad, but like in a WordPress specific scenario, are there ways to, work on this engagement where, like, I don't know, now it feels like there's a plugin that solves every problem, but are there plugins that that emphasize ways to communicate emotion or to, be able to have those types of maybe group conversations that pop up. You had forums here on this fly list dev, but can people create groups and chat, or like create video on the fly, or have emoticons to be able to clarify that they're just joking, or what are some things that we can use to make sure that people can convert it to the best of their abilities from what they may be used to this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know exactly what icon set WordPress supports, but I'm pretty confident it's either like a combination of Google and iOS, or however icons work. I don't actually know. Like I have no idea. But I do know that icons function. So when I'm on my iPhone and I'm writing a blog post and I put like a smiley face in there, it definitely renders that way. So emoticons are very, very WordPress friendly. When you're talking about some of this chatting stuff, it really kind of depends. Like WordPress might be the place where people are chatting, but it might also be that depending on your streaming software, they might be in a Zoom, they might be like in a Zoom chat, or they might be in a Skype chat, or they might be in a who knows what kind of chat. But I think that, having a code of conduct around this is super important, kind of comes back to some of that emotion. I think that, this is just a common community manager problem, right? Is making sure that everyone's engaging nicely with one another. So I strongly recommend that, you can bring in Giphy also depending on like the plugins and what you're working with and kind of what that functionality is, emoticons and bringing in like GIFs or some other shape to do that. I think some of those things can also get taken advantage of as well. So it's really that kind of like balancing act of like, how much do we want versus like how little do we want versus kind of how do we want to work with that, right? And so I think thinking about that is really important. You definitely can create groups with the BuddyBoss platform. Like if you just spun up a WordPress site, installed BuddyBoss, it is a commercial theme, and the plugin is open source now, but their theme itself, that is the powerful part of it, is commercial, so you do have to purchase some of these plugins that I've mentioned, but that alone will provide a really great community segment for you. And there are actually tools within that from the admin dashboard for you to be able to like moderate and flag things if they're problematic. I think utilizing as much as you can inside of the forums to really be able to bring in that emotion, I think is important. I'm trying to think from a WordPress standpoint if there's anything else. I think what I really want to reiterate is like, the only limitations to your WordPress site is your creativity. And it is literally that. Like, and the only reason why I can like build these websites that are like so complex that connect to all these other crazy things is just because I've done it enough times. It's just experience. It's me thinking about like, oh, I wish it had this thing. And then I'm like, I'm gonna search this thing, like maybe it exists, and eventually figuring out that either A, it's already out there, or B, maybe this needs to be built and or just working with what you have. Everything that I recommended in my blog post requires zero technical skills to implement. You do not need any technical skills to install any of these plugins or to do any of the configuration. There may be some things on a host level or from a domain level that get slightly technical, but nothing within the plugins would require you to have tech skills unless you actually want to dive into changing things. So I think taking advantage of that, like finding the things, being as creative as possible, outline like, here's my biggest dreams, here's what I really, really want, all the way down to like, here's my MVP, and just making sure that you're doing the research to find exactly what kind of offering you want. And I'm around in all the DevRel spaces. If you are just like itching for a specific feature and you just can't find it, like feel free to reach out, shoot me a DM, post it on Twitter, like I will help you find it.
Wow,
that's a good closing. A good closing comment is at the end of my blog post is I have a few links to some communities that you may want to join. One of which showcases like WordCamps and the WordPress user groups. Those were primarily in person in the past. A lot of them are switching to virtual. So getting involved in your local WordCamp or your local meetup group, because they're everywhere, you'll start to meet more people. There's also a Facebook group I recommended and a pay-to-play community that is really incredible in that blog post. So there are resources out there for you. There's so many people that do WordPress. You will find someone that can help you. So just be as creative as possible and try to like get those crazy dreams and just see what you end up with.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for all this great information. Thanks for people who joined, and we've had comments saying this is really helpful. It's definitely helpful for me as well. So yeah, I would definitely say you are living and breathing, like WordPress is just coming out of every pore. Your passion is very connected. So thank you so much for your time. Yes.
Thank you.
And
I've worked in this space for a while. So.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely, you haven't become jaded or cynical at all. You still are are very passionate about it. So thanks so much. Thanks to everybody who joined. As we mentioned, this is a weekly series leading up to DevRelCon Earth, which starts on June 30th. So come to devrelcon.com and you'll get the new info. So thanks very much. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.